Hello, everybody. My name is Drew Cleveland. I graduated from Gordon College in 2017 with a degree in theater arts and a minor in creative writing. I'm joined here today by my two colleagues who I will let introduce themselves, if they will.
Hello guys, my name is Julia Ragusa. I'm a 2020 graduate of Gordon College where I got my Bachelor of Arts in Music and Theater Arts.
Hi, my name is Olivia Neal. I graduated this past year, 2020 as well, and I studied communications and theater arts.
Yes, and thank you so much, guys, for joining me today. I very much appreciate it. So, yes, welcome to this kind of hybrid lecture reading thing, what we're affectionately referring to as Shakespeare in a Time of Crisis. So for this time, this brief time, we're going to be looking a little at how the works of William Shakespeare, or Billy Shakes, as I like to refer to him, still speak truth about the human condition even 400 years after they were written. More specifically, we're going to take a look at the ways in which the Bard's work is ever more relevant and valuable in times of crisis, both in his own time and throughout history. So some of the issues that we're going to be looking at through these readings and as we're talking about these plays, experienced both in Elizabethan England and in our own time, include things like social and political upheaval, racial prejudice, sexism and the objectification of women, societal expectations of marriage, gender roles, class warfare, toxic masculinity and the male ego, disease, poverty, and war. What fun. So suffice to say, this will be kind of a top-down view, more of a kind of a broad stroke analysis of all of these things. We don't really have a lot of time to go into full-on detail about every one of these, but we're going to be looking at it kind of broadly to give you kind of more of a holistic understanding. So just a little quick background of kind of what Shakespeare's world looks like in times of crisis, or in terms of crisis when he was writing his works. So his career was actually marked by rampant disease and political upheaval. In fact, during his lifetime alone, there were several outbreaks of the bubonic plague. In fact, one of them actually wiped out about a quarter of London's population, but Shakespeare actually survived them all through his life. Actually, during the outbreak of 1606, he wrote King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra all in the same year, probably while quarantining in his house to avoid the plague, which I think is rather ironic and somewhat topical. Unfortunately, the spread of the disease compelled London to close theaters across the city, including Shakespeare's own Globe Theatre, leaving him with a lot of time on his hands to do a lot of writing, kind of like we have now. Now, a quick kind of fun fact that I always like mentioning because I think it's interesting is that Shakespeare's characters, as we know, are killed and die in a number of varied and brutal ways, but not once in any of his plays does any character ever die from disease or a pandemic or a plague. And in none of his plays is a plague or a disease ever really one of the major set pieces. It's mentioned, it's referred, the idea of disease is referred to poetically or metaphorically through the verse, but it's never a major part of the story, which I think is also very interesting considering what was going on in real life behind the scenes while he was writing them. Now, in between two of these major outbreaks, we're talking about the kind of the idea of political upheaval now. In between two of these outbreaks was the failed gunpowder plot of 1605, in which Guy Fawkes and other conspirators attempted to blow up the Protestant Parliament and kill King James. Some of you might have seen V for Vendetta, which kind of romanticizes that. Remember the 5th of November, which is kind of become part of pop culture now, but that's kind of where that comes from. But this event really would have shook a lot of Londoners at the time, an actual assassination attempt on the king with explosives. So therefore, a play about a king who is blind to the intent of his daughters, such as King Lear, or a play about a power-hungry couple who plot to overthrow the King of Scotland, such as in Macbeth, would have resonated pretty deeply with contemporary audiences, I think. But anyway, let's get started with the reading now that we have that kind of foreground to the text. If you want to follow along in the text, though, if you're watching at home, we'll be using open source Shakespeare. That's open source Shakespeare, which is a free to use database of all of Shakespeare's works. So just a little shout out to them because they're great. I will also be naming the scene and line numbers for your reference if you want to follow along at home and read the text as well. Or feel free to just close your eyes and listen. That is perfectly fine too. So without further ado, we're going to get to our first of our 5 scenes today, starting with one of the most famous Roman plays of all time, Julius Caesar. So this is the scene number for this is Act 1, Scene 2, lines 112 to 272. That's open source Shakespeare. So just a quick brief synopsis to this, just so you understand what's going on. We're in Rome, 44 BC. The renowned general Julius Caesar has returned to Rome after a great military victory and is received with pomp and revelry by the people. Now, as he is entering with his entourage, a soothsayer tells him to, quote unquote, beware the Ides of March, a prophecy which he promptly ignores. Afterward, Brutus, here played by Olivia, and Cassius, here played by Julia, longtime friends of Caesar and each other, discuss the possibility and danger of his rise to power and their fear that the Republic will be dissolved. And this is the scene that follows.
Will you go see the order of the course?
Not I.
I pray you do.
I am not gamesome. I do lack some of part of that quick spirit that is in Antony. Let me not hinder Cassius. Your desires, I'll leave you.
Brutus, I do observe you now of late. I have not from your eyes that gentleness and show of love as I wont to have. You bear too stubborn and too strange a hand over your friend that loves you.
Cassius, be not deceived if I have veiled my look. I turn the trouble of my countenance merely upon myself. Vexed I am of late with passions of some difference, conceptions only proper to myself, which give some soil perhaps to my behaviors. But let not therefore my good friends be grieved, among which number, Cassius, be you one, nor construe any further my neglect than that poor Brutus, with himself at war, forgets the shows of love to other men.
Then, Brutus, I have much mistook your passion, by means whereof this breast of mine hath buried thoughts of great value, worthy cogitations. Oh, tell me, good Brutus, can you see your face?
No, Cassius, for the eye sees not itself, but by reflection, by some other things.
'Tis just, and it is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you might see your shadow. I have heard where many of the best respect in Rome, except immortal Caesar, speaking of Brutus and groaning underneath this age's yoke, have wished that noble Brutus had his eyes.
Into what dangers would you lead me, Cassius, that you would have me seek into myself for that which is not in me?
Therefore, good Brutus, be prepared to hear. And since you know you cannot see yourself so well as by reflection, I, your glass, will modestly discover to yourself that of yourself which you yet know not of. And be not jealous on me, gentle Brutus, were I a common laugher, or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every new protester. If you know that I do fawn on men and hug them hard and after scandal them, or if you know that I profess myself in banqueting to all the rout, then hold me dangerous.
What means this shadow? I do fear the people choose Caesar for their king.
Aye, do you fear it? Then must I think you would not have it so.
I would not, Cassius. Yet I love him well. But Wherefore do you hold me here so long? What is it that you would impart to me? If it be aught toward the general good, set honor in one eye and death in the other, and I will look on both indifferently. For let the gods so speed me as I love the name of honor more than I fear death.
I know that virtue to be in you, Brutus, as well as I do know your outward favor. Well, honor is the subject of my story. I cannot tell you what you and other men think of this life, but for my single self, I had as lief not to be as alive to be in awe of such a thing as I myself. I was born free as Caesar. So were you. We both have fed as well, and we can both endure the winter's cold as well as he. For once, upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber chafing with her shores, Caesar said to me, "Darest thou, Cassius, now leap in with me into this angry flood and swim to yonder point?" Upon the word, accoutred as I was, I plunged in and bade him follow. So, indeed, he did. The torrent roared, and we did buffet it with lusty sinews, throwing it aside and stemming it with the hearts of controversy. But ere we could arrive the point proposed, Caesar cried, "Help me, Cassius, or I sink!" I, as Aeneas, our great ancestor, did from the flames of Troy upon his shoulder the old Anchises bear, so from the waves of Tiber did I, the tired Caesar. And this man is now become a god. And Cassius is a wretched creature and must bend his body of Caesar carelessly, but not on him. He had a fever when he was in Spain, and when the fit was on him, I did mark how he did shake. 'Tis true, this god did shake. His coward lips did from their color fly, and that same eye, whose bend doth all the world, did lose its luster. I did hear him groan. Aye, and that tongue of his that bade the Romans mark him and write his speeches in their books, alas, it cried, "Give me some drink, Titinius," as a sick girl. Oh, ye gods, it doth amaze me. A man of such feeble temper should so get the start of the majestic world and bear the palm alone.
Another general shout. I do believe that these applause are for some new honors that are heaped on Caesar.
Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we, petty men, walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. For we are underlings. Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that? Caesar. Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is as fair a name. Sound them. It doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them. It is as heavy. Conjure with them. Brutus will be starting a spirit just as soon as Caesar. Now, in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat doth this our Caesar feed, that he has grown so great? Ah, age, thou art shamed. Rome, thou hast lost the breed of noble bloods. When went there by an age since the great flood? But it was famed with more than one man. Now it is Rome indeed, and room enough, when there is in it but only one man. Oh, you and I have heard our fathers say, there was a Brutus once that would have brooked the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king.
That you do love me? I am nothing jealous. what you would work me to? I have some aim. How I have thought of this and of these times, I shall recount hereafter. For this present, I would not, so with love I might entreat you, be any further moved. What you have said, I will consider. What you have to say, I will with patience hear, and find a time both meet to hear and answer such high things. Till then, my noble friend, chew upon this. Brutus had rather be a villager than to repute himself a son of Rome under these hard conditions as this time is like to lay upon us.
I am glad that my weak words have struck but thus much show of fire from Brutus.
The games are done, and Caesar is returning.
As they pass by, pluck Casca by the sleeve, and he will, after his sour fashion, tell you what hath proceeded worthy note today.
Well done, friends. Well done. Thank you for that. So real briefly, we're going to look at some of the themes we're looking at in this play, and then some of the historical context of when it was being written. But this play it's a very interesting play. So if you know Julius Caesar, you know that Brutus does in fact end up becoming indoctrinated or ingratiated with the conspirators against Caesar and ends up helping to assassinate him very famously. That's where the famous line "Et tu, Brute" comes from, right? Now, after that, though, that takes place before even the halfway mark of the play. The rest of the play and the action and the conflict is about the civil war that ensues after Caesar's death, and Mark Antony's rising up against them, against the conspirators, and raising an army and fighting them. And the play actually ends with Brutus and Cassius killing themselves before they're executed. So it does not have it is very much a tragedy in every way. But the play does address a very important theme that I think is relevant to today as well, and that is the conflict between the love of one's leader and the love of one's country. And what does it mean when we realize that the person that we love or really honor as our leader turns out to be not as good as we thought he was? It talks about how power corrupts and is therefore untrustworthy, and how it corrupts even the worthiest and most noble of men, such as Caesar, who becomes a tyrant, and in Brutus and Cassius's eyes has to be eliminated. It talks about the complexity of revolution, how nothing is ever quite black and white, and how people get hurt, and more importantly, though, I think it talks about the power of the people's voice and the people's will. And ultimately, what really drives the action of this play is the people's voice, right? It's Brutus and Cassius who have to win the will of the people after they kill Caesar and win them over to their side. It's Antony who turns the people against them and forces them to flee Rome. So it's ultimately the people that drive the influence and the power of the play, which I think is very timely, I think, and very interesting to consider. Now, the play was actually written around 1599, slightly earlier in Shakespeare's career. But it was written as the big event that was happening at the time it was written as Elizabeth I was nearing death. And as many of us know, Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen. She never married, she never had any kids, and she had not named a successor to the throne by that point. So a lot of people were afraid that if Elizabeth died and didn't name an heir, a civil war might ensue for the throne, causing who knows how much death and violence, right? So a lot of people were afraid of this, and so it was on their minds at the time. So a play about the assassination of a national leader and subsequent civil war may have been Shakespeare's way of expressing fears over the future of England. But he was using subject matter that was, hundreds of years old, which I think is very interesting. But we do have limited time, so we're going to keep moving here on to our next scene. Now we are actually doing another Roman play next, one of my favorites actually, called Coriolanus. Some of you may be familiar with it. The open source scene for this is Act 5, Scene 3. That's Act 5, Scene 3, lines 3580 to 3702. So briefly, the synopsis is as follows, right? once again, we are in Rome, as I said, but roughly 400 years before the events of Julius Caesar, during the city-state's transition from a monarchy to a republic. So at this time, Rome is not yet the world power that we know it as. It's still one of many different tribes or city-states warring with others in the region. But there's a famine in the land, and the plebeians, or the lower orders, the lower classes of the city, are rioting due to the aristocrats hoarding grain for themselves and causing the people to starve. Now, at the risk of being too biased, that may or may not sound familiar to some of us. Meanwhile, war has broken out with the Volscians, a neighboring tribe. So enter Caius Martius, here played by Julia, a fiery and headstrong general who leads the Roman army against the Volscians and takes the town of Corioli. Now, this victory earns him the title of Coriolanus. Shortly thereafter, he is persuaded to make a show of humility to the public in order to obtain the rank of consul, a political office. But the people, who resent him for the high cost of grain and his status as an aristocrat, as a upper class, and who he despises for their ingratitude and weakness, turn on him when he can no longer conceal his contempt for the people. They cast him out as an exile. Now Coriolanus, indignant and furious, joins with his old enemies, the Volscians, and in particular his main rival, Tullus Aufidius, the leader of the Volscians, and he joins them in an assault on Rome. Before the attack can occur, however, his mother, Volumnia, here played by Olivia, his wife, and his son make one last attempt to persuade him otherwise. Take it away.
Even he, your wife, this lady, and myself are suitors to you.
I beseech you, peace. Or, if you'll ask, remember this before. The thing I have forsworn to grant may never be held by you denials. Do not bid me dismiss my soldiers, or capitulate again with Rome's mechanics. Tell me not wherein I seem unnatural. Desire not to ally my rages and revenges with your colder reasons.
Oh, no more, no more. You have said you will not grant us anything. But we have nothing else to ask but that which you deny already. Yet we will ask that, if you fail in our request, the blame may hang upon your hardness. Therefore, hear us.
Aufidius, and you, Volskis, mark, for we'll not hear from Rome in private. Your request?
Should we be silent and not speak? Our raiment and state of bodies would bewray what life we have led since thy exile. Think with thyself how more unfortunate than all living women are we come hither, since that thy sight, which should make our eyes flow with joy, our hearts dance with comforts, constrains them weep and shake with fear and sorrow, making them mother, wife, and child, to see the son, the husband, and the father tearing his country's bowels out. And to poor we, thine enemies most capital, thou bearest us our prayers to the gods, which is a comfort that all but we enjoy. For how can we, alas, how can we for our country pray? Whereto we are bound. Together with thy victory, whereto we are bound. Alack, or we must lose the country, our dear nurse, or else thy person, our comfort in the country. We must find in evident calamity, though we had our wish, which side should win. For either thou must, as a foreign recreant, be led with manacles throughout our street, or else triumphantly tread on thy country's ruin, and bear the palm for having bravely shed thy wife and children's blood. For myself, son, I purpose not to wait on fortune till these war determines. If I cannot persuade thee rather to show a noble grace to both parts than seek the end of one, thou shalt no sooner march to assault thy country than to tread. Trust thou shalt not on thy mother's womb that brought thee to this world.
I have sat too long.
Oh, nay, go not from us thus. If it were so that our request did tend to save the Romans, thereby to destroy the Volsces, whom you serve, you might condemn us as poisonous of your honor. No, our sweet is that you reconcile them. While the Volsces may say, this mercy we have showed the Romans, this we received, and each and either side give the all hail to thee and cry, be blessed for making up this peace. Thou knowest, great son, the end of war's uncertain, but this certain, that, if thou conquer Rome, the benefit which thou shalt thereby reap is such a name, whose repetition will be dogged with curses, whose chronicle thus writ, the man was noble, but with his last attempt he wiped it out.
Oh.
Royed his country, and his name remains to the ensuing age abhorred. Speak to me, son. Thou hast affected the fine strains of honor to imitate the graces of the gods, to tear with thunder the wide cheeks of the air, and yet to charge the sulphur with a bolt that should but rive an oak. Why dost not speak? Think thou it honorable for a noble man still to remember wrongs? Daughter, speak you. He cares not for your weeping. Speak thou, boy, perhaps thy childishness will move him more than can our reasons. There's no man in the world more bound to his mother. Yet here he lets me parade like one of the stocks. Thou hast never in thy life shown thy mother any courtesy when she, poor hen, fond of no second brood, has clucked these to the warren safely home, loaden with honor. Say my requests unjust, and spurn me back, but if it be not so, thou art not honest, and the gods will plague thee, that thou restraint from me the duty which to a mother's parts belong. He turns away. Oh, down, ladies, let us shame him with our knees. To his surname Coriolanus longs more pride than pity to our prayers. Down! In end, this is the last, so we will home to Rome and die among our neighbors. Nay, behold, but kneels and holds up bands for fellowship. Does reason our petition with more strength than thou hast to deny it. Come, let us go. This fellow had a Volscian to his mother. His wife is in Corioli, and his child like him by chance. Yet give us our dispatch. I am hushed until our city be afire, and then I'll speak a little.
Oh, mother. Mother. What have you done? Behold, the heavens do ope. The gods look down. In this unnatural scene they laugh at. Oh, mother. Mother! Oh! You have won a happy victory for Rome. But for your son, believe it. Oh, believe it. Most dangerously you have with him prevailed, if not most mortal to him. But let it come.
Well done again. Take a second, you guys, to shake that one out, breathe it off. There's a lovely, I love that play so much, particularly that scene. So briefly, let's look a little bit at kind of what some of these thematic elements are here. Firstly, to my mind, the biggest one in this play is the theme of class division. The first scene of the play is a group of plebeians flooding the stage and basically saying, we're resolved to take down the aristocracy or die trying, basically. So that's, you know, that is a very kind of, that's a thread that runs through the whole play and asks the question of, brings to our attention the issue of class division and class suppression too. But on top of that, it also addresses systemic oppression and rebellion and rioting. That feels very topical now, and Shakespeare was writing about this hundreds of years before, right? It asks the question of what really makes a good leader. Is it somebody who listens to the voice of the people, even at the expense of their own beliefs, or is it somebody who is aligned with what we call conviction politics, which is basically the politics which are based in one's convictions and nothing else, right? So a politician who is practices conviction politics would be somebody like Caius Martius, like Coriolanus, who believes that the people ought to be dominated and suppressed and ruled, and that's their role as the lower orders, as the lower classes, and that's what he sticks to. And ultimately, that lack of compromise that he has ends up killing him. At the end of the play, right after this scene, in fact, his family leaves him, and Coriolanus is left with the Volscians and Aufidius, and Aufidius, feeling betrayed and enraged by his betrayal, kills Coriolanus at the end of the play, and that's how it ends. So ultimately, Coriolanus's lack of ability to compromise is what kills him. His rigidity is what kills him. But it does also, I think, present the difference between the honesty of war and the performative / insincere nature of politics, and how, you know, it cannot be, you know, it can be argued that Coriolanus is one of the most, if not the most honest character in the play, even though he's a terrible person. Whereas we see lots of kind of political figures in the play as well, who may or may not be fighting for something good, but they're not very honest. And so I think that also creates an interesting sort of dichotomy as well between those things. And there's more I could say about that, about this play and its kind of roll through time, but we have limited time. So this play was actually written somewhere between 1605 and 1608, later in his career. And it's possible that Shakespeare was actually deriving a lot of the content of this play from some of the class struggles that were happening in England at the time, particularly between the newly crowned King James, the successor to Queen Elizabeth, and Parliament. And there was this ongoing struggle between how much power Parliament ought to have, how much power the crown ought to have. And so there was this ongoing struggle between them. And not to say that Parliament really represented the people whatsoever at the time, but there was an interesting sort of division in the ruling upper echelons of the country at the time. So let's keep moving here. We've got 2 down, we've got 3 to go. We're going to jump into a slightly lighter play for you, since we've had 2 kind of dark and heavy Roman plays. And if you know me, you know that my preference is always for tragedy, but that's just because I'm a sullen little man. So we are jumping into Much Ado About Nothing. The open source scene for this is Act 4, Scene 1. That's Act 4, Scene 1, lines 1909 to 1980. 1909 to 1980. Now, looking at this, leading up to this scene, we are in the beautiful Italian town of Messina, and I will be kind of abridging some of this content just so you can understand kind of what this scene you're going to hear is about. We were in the beautiful Italian town of Messina, in which lives the gentleman Leonato, his daughter Hero, and his niece Beatrice, here played by Olivia. Soon, Don Pedro, Claudio, Benedict, and Don John, and here Julia is playing Benedict, return home from war. Now, fairly quickly, Hero and Claudio profess their love for each other and are engaged to be married. Meanwhile, pick up where they left off, exchanging witty barbs and insults between one another. Now, Hero, Claudio, and their friends begin a game to get Beatrice and Benedict to fall in love with each other. And before long, it works. Beatrice and Benedict do fall in love, but they disdain the idea of marriage so much that they refuse to admit it to each other. Now, meanwhile, the sullen Don John hatches a plot to tear apart the impending marriage of Hero and Claudio by making Claudio believe that Hero has been unfaithful. Now, on their wedding day, at the ceremony, Claudio publicly shames Hero and storms out. Afterward, Benedict approaches Beatrice, who is mourning over the dishonor of her cousin.
Lady Beatrice, have you wept all this while?
Yea, and I will weep a while longer.
Oh, I will not desire that.
I have no reason. I do it freely.
Surely, I do believe your fair cousin is wronged.
How much might the man deserve of me that would right her?
Well, is there any way to show such friendship?
A very even way, but no such friend.
May a man do it?
It is a man's office, but not yours.
I do love nothing in this world so well as you. Is that not strange?
As strange as the thing I know not. It were as possible for me to say I loved nothing so well as you, but believe me not, and yet I lie not. I confess nothing, nor I deny nothing. I am sorry for my cousin.
By my sword. Beatrice, thou lovest me.
Do not swear and eat it.
I will swear by it that you love me, and I will make him eat it that says I love not you.
Will you not eat your word?
If no sauce that can be devised to it,
Why,
I protest, I love thee.
God forgive me.
What offense, sweet Beatrice.
You stayed me in a happy hour. I was about to protest I loved you.
And do it with all thy heart.
I love you so much with all my heart, but none is left to protest.
Come, bid me do anything for thee.
Kill Claudio.
Not for the wide world.
You kill me to deny it. Farewell.
Sorry, sweet Beatrice.
Oh, I am gone. Though I am here, there is no love in me. Nay, I pray you let me go.
Beatrice,
In faith, I will go.
we'll be friends first.
You dare easier be friends with me than fight with mine enemy?
Is Claudio thine enemy?
Is he not approved in the height of villain? That hath slandered, scorned, dishonored my kinswoman? Oh, that I were a man! What, bear her in hand until they come to take hands, and then with public accusation, uncovered slander, unmitigated rancor, oh, God, that I were a man. I would eat his heart in the marketplace.
Hear me, Beatrice.
Walk with a man out a window, a proper saying.
Nay, but
Sweet
Beatrice.
hero, she is wronged, she is slandered, she is undone.
Beatrice.
Princes and counties, surely a princely testimony, a goodly count confect, a sweet gallant, surely, oh, that I were a man for his sake, or that I had any friend would be a man for my sake, but manhood is melted into courtesies, valor into compliment, and men are only turned into tongue, and trim ones too. He is only as valiant as Hercules, that only tells a lie and swears it. I cannot be a man with wishing, therefore I will die a woman with grieving.
Very good, Beatrice. By this hand, I love thee.
Use it for my love some other way than swearing by it.
Think you in your soul that Count Claudio hath wronged Hero.
Nay, as sure as I have a thought or a soul.
Enough. I am engaged. I will challenge him. I will kiss your hand, and so I leave you. By this hand, Claudio shall render me a dear account. As you think of me, so hear of me. Go, comfort your cousin. I must say that she is dead. And so, farewell.
Well done, friends. Well done. I know I probably picked the heaviest scene I could possibly find in a comedy. Leave that to me. But real quick, let's talk about some of these themes here. It's always, knowing me, it's always a little harder for me to find the relevance in comedies than it is in tragedies, but there's actually quite a lot to talk about here in terms of thematic relevance, I think, at least in Much Ado. I think the biggest thing that this play addresses both then and now is societal expectations of marriage, right? And how, specifically how Beatrice and Benedict both resist those expectations. And you know, how those particular expectations were particularly laid on women at the time. But it addresses a lot about about sexism as it pertains to purity, and how the idea of Hero, a young unmarried woman, having broken her vow and been unfaithful, is like the end of the world, at least to Claudio. The idea that this young woman would soil herself, quote unquote, is inexcusable in this world, right? And that's why Claudio rejects her so out of hand, right? But the play also does kind of cause us to question, well, the idea of male pride and how easily wounded it is, even by the suggestion of a threat to it, right? And how we do have to kind of address and confront how quickly Claudio does just spurn her, even at the rumor that she was unfaithful. That's problematic too, and in different interpretations of the play, that is certain directors have found a way to bring that more to the surface. But then it also, in a slightly lighter way, does address kind of the parallel between real warfare, because there is, all the men in the play they enter into the play at the beginning from war, after coming back home from war. And it parallels that with the warfare of love, and how it sometimes feels like the warfare of love, the uncertainty, the battleground that is love, is a topic that has somehow felt always relevant to us through all time. Now, it was written in somewhere between 1598 and 1599. And firstly, on the topic of war, war was an ever-present reality for the people of London in 1590s England. First, there was the war with Catholic France, and then there was the 9 Years' War, in which Ireland rebelled against England, costing thousands of lives. So there was very much an ever-present reality of war for the people at the time, happening in the background. Now, as much as Shakespeare's plays confronted difficult problems of the day, for many, his comedies likely provided some sort of escape from difficult realities, in which happy endings happened all too rarely. And just to give you an example of this, life was rough at the time for the sick, the elderly, the orphaned. The average lifespan in London was about 42 years, but even younger for the poor. Poor sanitation was common, disease was rampant, medical knowledge was limited, with only the best resources and conditions enjoyed by, guess who? The ruling class. So life was not easy for many, many people at the time. So it may have been something of a relief to be able to see a play like Much Ado, where in spite of all these terrible things happening, in spite of war in the background, in spite of betrayal and deceit and all these awful things, there is still redemption at the end. There's still a happy ending. There's Claudio and Hero find reconciliation. Beatrice and Benedict do get married and fall in love in the end. and there is a happy ending. So that I think may have been something necessary for a lot of people to see at the time. And there are other gender-related themes that are relevant in this play as well that we'll talk about once we get to our last play. But before we do that, well, actually, we'll talk about it in our next two plays. So next, that brings me to our next play, Othello, which is, I think, a lovely, beautiful tragedy of a play. It's open source scene Act 4, Scene 3, Act 4, Scene 3. The lines are 30:30 to 31:32. That's 30:30 to 31:32. Now, briefly, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here, the Venetian army is at war with the Turks, okay? Iago, who is ensign to Othello, a general of Moorish descent, is enraged due to the fact that Othello has passed him over for a promotion, instead bestowing it on the less experienced Michael Cassio. Gradually, we watch as Iago hatches a plot to destroy both Othello and Cassio by making Othello believe that his young wife, Desdemona, is having an affair with Cassio. As Othello's suspicion grows, so does his madness. He casts off Desdemona, striking her and calling her a whore, and commanding her to go to bed. Shortly after, Emilia, here played by Julia, maid to Desdemona and wife to Iago, attempts to provide emotional support to the grieving Desdemona, here played by Olivia.
How goes it now? He looks gentler than he did.
He says he will return incontinent. He hath commanded me to go to bed and bade me to dismiss you.
Dismiss me?
It was his bidding. Therefore, good Emilia, give me my nightly wearing and adieu. We must not now displease him.
I wish you had never seen him.
So would not I. My love doth so approve him that even his stubbornness, his checks, his frowns, pray thee unpin me, have grace and favor in them.
I have laid those sheets on the bed that she bade me.
All's one. Good faith, how foolish are our minds. If I do die before thee, pray thee, shroud me in one of those same sheets.
Come, you talk.
My mother had a maid called Barbara. She was in love, and he she loved proved mad, and did forsake her. She had a song of willow, an old thing, 'twas but it expressed her fortune, and she died singing it. And that song tonight will not go from my mind. I've much to do but to go hang my head all at one side and sing it like poor Barbara. Pray thee, dispatch.
Shall I go fetch your nightgown?
No, unpin me here. This Lodovico is a proper man.
A very handsome man.
Speaks well.
I know a lady in Venice who would have walked barefoot to Palestine for a touch of his nether lip.
The poor soul sat sighing by a sycamore tree. Sing all a green willow, her hand on her bosom, her head on her knee. Sing willow, willow, willow. The fresh streams ran by her and murmured her moans. Sing willow, willow, willow. Her salt tears fell from her and softened the stones. Lay by these. Sing willow, willow, willow. Pray thee, hie thee, but come none. Sing all a green willow must be my garland. I called my love false love, but what said he that... Oh, no, that's not next. Hark, who is it that knocks?
It's the wind.
I called my love false love, but what said he then? Sing willow, willow, willow. If I court more women, you'll coach with more men. So, get thee gone. Good night, mine eyes do itch. Doth that bode weeping?
'Tis neither here nor there.
I have heard it said so. These men! These men! Dost thou unconscious think? Tell me, Amelia, that there be women do abuse their husbands in such gross kind?
There be some such, no question.
Wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world?
Why, would not you?
No, by this heavenly light.
Nor I neither by this heavenly light. I might do it as well in the dark.
Wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world?
Oh, the world's a huge thing. It is a great price for a small vice.
In troth, I think thou wouldst not.
In troth, I think I should. And undo it when I had done. Marry, I would not do such a thing for a joint ring, nor for measures of lawn, nor for gowns, petticoats, nor caps, nor any petty exhibition. But for the whole world? Why, who would not make her husband a cuckold to make him a monarch? I should venture purgatory for it.
Beshrew me if I would do such a wrong for the whole world.
The wrong is but a wrong of the world. And having the world for your labor, 'tis a wrong in your own world, and you might quickly make it right.
I do not think there is any such woman.
Yes, a dozen. And as many to the vantage as would store the world they played for. Ugh. But I do think it is their husbands' faults if wives do fall. Say they slack their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps, or else break out into peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us. Or say they strike us, or scant our former having in despite. Why, we have galls, and though we have some grace, yet we have some revenge. Ah, let the husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. What is it that they do when they changes for others? Huh? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? I think it doth. Is frailty that thus errs? It is so too. And have we not affections, desires for sport, frailty, as men have? Oh, then let them use us well. Else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us to do so.
Good night. Good night. Heaven me such uses send, not to pick bad from bad, but by bad mend.
Oh, that scene tears me apart every time. Beautifully written, beautifully acted. Thank you both. So there's not really any way to talk about Othello. The themes and the relevance of Othello without talking about race and racial prejudice. Othello is, in the context of the play, Othello is the only person of color, or any main character is a person of color, um, and is constantly up against the world he's living in. In spite of the fact he's in a position of power, many dislike him and hate him due to the color of his skin, especially Iago, right? Desdemona's father believes that Othello could only have won her over by some evil trickery, right? And we see how Iago actually uses that to his advantage. Iago uses other people's um, racial prejudices against them. He tries to take Othello down by getting Desdemona's father to interrupt their marriage based on the fact he doesn't want someone like Othello marrying his daughter, right? But it also addresses a very big issue of sexism, and how women at this time are perceived as property, both, well, first of their father and then of their husband, such as with, you could say that's somewhat the case of Desdemona. It addresses the big issue of masculine ego and jealousy. Again, we see how Othello is persuaded so easily to believe that his wife is unfaithful, and consumed with envy to the point of murdering her. And actually, this is something that these two characters have in common, Desdemona and Emilia, where by the end, very famously, Othello murders Desdemona in her bed. But at the end, Iago, who is married to Emilia, also kills her in order to stop her from telling everybody what his whole plan was this whole time. So it kind of, knowing that, I think it kind of lends this scene a little more weight, right? And somehow the themes of racial prejudice and objectification of women still feel very familiar today. I don't know about you, but it's kind of hard not to see that relevance in this play that was written more than 400 years ago, and a lot of these issues still feel very potent to us somehow. But it was written around 1603 to 1604, and obviously there's a lot here, more than we have time to really go into in full detail, but just a little kind of context here. This is a time when quote unquote blackness was associated, at least in literature and art, with darkness, evil, demonic forces, things like that. And that presumption reinforced prejudice against foreigners and citizens of color with ever increasing frequency. But Shakespeare, interestingly enough, turns that kind of convention on its head, and we see Othello, someone of color, as one of the first Black tragic heroes, with a fully realized character. Up to this point, people of color were almost always portrayed as evil or as villains, as evil character actors and things like that. But in the play, many do regard Othello with renown and admiration. Save Iago, of course, who regards him as a beast and an outsider, right? But this play also very likely touched on some very surface level tensions in early 17th century England, and that was anxieties over interracial marriage. The play in the early 1600s, this is a play in the early 1600s depicting an interracial marriage between Desdemona and Othello, and that was something that was at least within the more common spheres of society, was very infrequent, almost never happened. And this play may have addressed some of those societal discomforts. So Shakespeare's taking a lot of the tensions and the conflicts and the crises around him in his society, and kind of siphoning them into the conflict and the action of this play, which I think is very interesting. Now, meanwhile, this was also a time when, speaking of arranged marriages, this is a time when arranged marriages for women were commonplace, and unmarried women were essentially deprived of any privileges in society, at least any privileges held by men. So again, we see Desdemona and Othello not marrying out of an arranged marriage, but marrying because they choose each other freely as individuals, which is also kind of a step away from the societal conventions of the time as well. But we do have limited time, so we're going to move on to our last scene here. And we are going to end with a rather lighter play, a rather lighter scene. In fact, you at home may be thinking, "Thank God." It is As You Like It. The open source scene is Act 3, Scene 2, one of my favorite scenes from that play. Act 3, Scene 2, lines 1391 to 1504. 1391 to 1504. And I'll give you a little synopsis first. And Shakespeare's comedies can be a little convoluted. He likes to weave together a lot of different subplots and characters and larger characters and minor characters and all kinds of things. So there are a lot of names, so just try and bear with me. In a court somewhere in France, the young Orlando is burdened under the yoke of his older brother, Oliver, who refuses to give him the means or the training befitting his station as a gentleman. In a desperate bid to either win favor with Duke Frederick or be killed, Orlando challenges the undefeated Charles to a wrestling match. Now, at the match, he and the lovely young Rosalind meet and instantly fall in love. Kind of a common trope of Shakespeare's comedies. When Orlando unexpectedly wins the wrestling match, Oliver, his brother, seeks to kill Orlando. Fearing for his life, Orlando flees into the forest of Ardennes. Now, meanwhile, Rosalind's father, Duke Senior, has been usurped and exiled from the court by his brother, Duke Frederick. Accusing Rosalind of treason for being her father's daughter and no other crime, Frederick banishes Rosalind, threatening to have her executed. Now, afraid for her own life, Rosalind resolved to disguise herself as a boy named Ganymede and flee into the forest as well, along with her cousin Celia. Now, after the love-struck Orlando has been hanging his poorly written odes to Rosalind throughout the forest, he and Rosalind meet again, though due to her disguise, Orlando, here played by Olivia, is completely unaware that he is talking to the woman he has been pining after all this while, who is really Rosalind, here played by Julia. Take it away.
I will speak to him like a saucy lackey, and under the habit play the knave with him. Do you hear, Forester?
Very well. What would you?
I pray you. What is't o'clock?
You should ask me what time of day. There's no clock in the forest.
Then there is no true lover in the forest. Else, sighing every minute and groaning every hour would detect the lazy foot of time as well as a clock.
And why not the swift foot of time? Had that not been as proper?
By no means, sir. Time travels in diverse paces with diverse persons. I'll tell you who time ambles withal, who time trots withal, who time gallops withal, and who he stands still withal.
I pray thee, who doth he trot withal?
Marry, he trots hard with a young maid between the contract of her marriage and the day it is solemnized. If the interim be but a sennight, time's pace is so hard that it seems the length of a 7-year.
Who ambles time withal?
With a priest that lacks Latin, and a rich man that hath not the gout. For the one sleeps easily because he cannot study, and the other lives merrily because he feels no pain. The one lacking the burden of lean and wasteful learning, the other knowing no burden of heavy, tedious penury. These time ambles withal.
Well, who doth he gallop withal?
With a thief to the gallows. For though he go as softly as foot can fall, he thinks himself too soon there.
Who stays it still withal?
With lawyers in the vacation. For they sleep between term and term, and then they perceive not how time moves.
Where dwell you, pretty youth?
With this shepherdess, my sister, here in the skirts of the forest, like spring upon a petticoat.
Are you native of this place?
As the coney that you see dwell where she is kindled.
Your accent is something finer than you could purchase in so removed a dwelling.
been told so by many. But indeed, an old religious uncle of mine taught me to speak, who was in his youth an inland man, one that knew courtship too well, for there he fell in love. I have heard him read many lectures against it, and I thank God I am not a woman, to be touched with so many giddy offences as he hath generally taxed their whole sex withal.
Can you remember any of the principal evils that he laid to the charge of women?
There were none principal. They were all like one another, as halfpence are. Every one fault seeming monstrous, till his fellow fault came to match it.
I pray thee, recount some of them.
Oh, I will not cast away my physic, but on those that are sick. There is a man haunts the forest that abuses our young plants with carving Rosalind on their barks, hangs odes upon hawthorns and elegies upon brambles, all, forsooth, deifying the name of Rosalind. If I could meet that fancy monger, I would give him some good counsel.
I am he that is so love
to have the quotidian of love upon him.
I am he that is so love-shaked. I pray you tell me your remedy.
There is none of my uncle's marks upon you. He taught me how to know man and love. In which cage of rushes I am sure you are not prisoner.
What were his marks?
A lean cheek, which you have not. A blue eye and sunken, which you have not. An unquestionable spirit, which you have not. A beard neglected, which you have not, but I pardon you for that, for simply your having in beard is a younger brother's revenue. Then your hose should be ungardened, your bonnet unbanded, your sleeve unbuttoned, your shoe untied, and everything about you demonstrating a careless desolation. But you are no such man. You are rather point device in your accoutrements, as loving yourself and seemingly the lover of another.
Fair youth, I could make thee believe I love.
Me believe it? You may as soon make her that you love believe it, which I warrant she is apter to do than confess she does. That is one of the points in which women still give the lie to their consciences. But, in good sooth, are you he that hangs the verses on the trees wherein Rosalind is so admired?
I swear to thee, youth, by the white hand of Rosalind, I am that he, that unfortunate he.
But are you so much in love as your rhymes speak?
Neither rhyme nor reason can express how much.
Love is merely a madness. And, I tell you, deserves as well a dark horse as madmen do. And the reason why they are so not punished and cured is that the lunacy is so ordinary that the whippers are in love too. Yet I profess curing it by counsel.
Did you ever cure any so?
Yes, one. And in this manner, he was to imagine me, his love, his mistress. And I set him every day to woo me, at which time I, being but a moonish youth, grieve, be effeminate, changeable, longing and liking, proud, fantastical, apish, shallow, inconstant, full of tears, full of smiles, for every passion something, and for no passion truly anything, as boys and women are for the most part cattle of this color, would now like him, now loathe him, then entertain him, then forswear him, now weep for him, then spit at him, that I drave my suitor from his mad humor of love to a living humor of madness, which was to forswear the full stream of the world and to live in a nook merely monastic. And thus I cured him. In this way will I take upon me to wash your liver as clean as a sound sheep's heart, that there shall not be one spot of love in it.
I would not be cured.
I would cure you, if you would but call me Rosalind, and come every day to my coat and woo me.
Now, by the faith of my love, I will. Tell me where it is.
Go with me to it, and I'll show you. And, by the way, you shall tell me where in the forest you live. Will you go?
With all my heart, good youth.
Nay, you must call me Rosalind.
Love that scene. So very lighthearted and innocent. Love it. Well done, my friends. So we're keep going here. I'm going to briefly talk about some of the themes and historical content of this play, and then I'll have a few closing remarks, and we'll be done. So this play, I do think, says a lot about escaping the world of expectation and stricture to a world of freedom and individual expression. Well, it's what's known as a pastoral play, which one of the main kind of features of pastoral plays at the time was the difference between the court and the country, the stricture and the structure of courtly life and urban life versus the kind of freedom and relaxation and peace of country life. So it kind of talks a lot about that. But aside from that, it does deal a lot with expectation, what's expected of Orlando and Rosalind, what's put upon them to live up to, and both of their experiences of escaping into a world of freedom to find their own selves in that perhaps they couldn't find in their other world, right? And of course, as a comedy, you do have to address what kind of the theme of seeking out and finding joy and redemption in spite of suffering, hardship, and grief. What Norm Jones would, of course, refer to as narrow escape into faith, right? That there's a very real possibility that things are not going to turn out right. That there is, that people like Jaques or Touchstone, or particularly Jaques, won't find that redemption, won't find that joy in life, that glimpse of hope, that maybe Orlando might actually fall out of love with Rosalind and all be lost with that. Maybe they will have to return to court and return to their old lives and not be changed. There's a very real possibility of all of that through the play until the end, when we finally see some Deus ex machina, of course, with the marriage god Hymen coming in, and Rosalind revealing herself as the real Rosalind, and Orlando and Rosalind get married. Celia and Oliver get married, and Phoebe and Sylvius get married as well. Those are other characters in the play as well. So there is a happy ending after all, and that is kind of what defines classic comedy. But it does talk a lot about gender roles too, and the fact that it's noteworthy that Rosalind, in order to kind of train Orlando how to love truthfully and love Rosalind as a real person and not just an idol, has to disguise herself as a man in order to do that, in order to have any real agency, ironically, which is kind of harkens to the imbalances in Shakespeare's society and also in our own society too, I think. And Shakespeare does talk a lot about too in this play about the difference between infatuation versus real loving, what that looks like, and how by the end Orlando hopefully has learned to love Rosalind as a real person, as an individual, as the full human being as she is, and not just somebody to put on a pedestal as an idol, right? And I think that in itself too was Shakespeare was way ahead of his time in writing a story about that as well. But it was written around 1599 to 1600, somewhere in there. Now it's interesting, in Shakespeare's time, it was commonplace for and I mentioned this earlier with Othello, it was a commonplace for a young woman not to have a choice of who she married. So to a contemporary audience, the idea of choosing who we marry and marrying that person purely for love may have been either whimsical and noble or downright farcical, right? Shakespeare, kind of Shakespeare tackles tackles the theme of love in many different ways through his plays, and in his comedies, it's often something of a point of humor and light ribbing. I think, kind of bringing out the kind of inconsistencies and ironies of young love. But think about plays like Romeo and Juliet. I would argue that in that play, right, the idea of young love is depicted very nobly and tragically and with a lot of value. So he goes about it both ways and is not afraid to kind of tackle it holistically, I think, in different plays. But this was also a time that saw rigid gender roles enforced by society. And for many, no real change from their situation was possible. Which I think is also probably kind of touched on people's sense of being confined in the society they were in. And what's interesting about that is that this play takes that convention, that knowledge in society, and Shakespeare here writes a story about a young woman who takes her life into her own hands and makes things better for herself, which I also think was ahead of its time for then and is all the more timely now. And the last point here is too that I think writing a pastoral tale would have touched on people's collective sense of the confining and oppressive nature of the city and urban life in contrast to the freedom and simplicity of a rural life, right? My friends, that's all the plays that we have for you today. Before I leave you though, I just want to leave you with a few closing remarks here before we end here today. I was thinking about the role of art in times of crisis and what its value is, and specifically Shakespeare as well, and how that's still relevant. And I thought about how the deeper a nation in a world enters into a crisis or a series of crises, as the case may be, the more vital art becomes. Not only that, but the worse things get, the more material an artist has to work with in order to speak to people. Now, art allows us to better comprehend our environment and our place in it. Now, the reason Shakespeare is so relevant and timeless is that his subject matter so often addresses realities of the human condition. And stories about who we are, who we could be, never stop being important, I think. Shakespeare's plays help us understand the truth of ourselves and how sometimes that can only be revealed through crisis, right? Who we are comes through hardship a lot of times. In this, we begin to truly comprehend the qualities within ourselves that make us strong and the ways in which we have to change in order to improve the world around us. And those are both important to recognize right now, I think. My friends, that's all I have time for today. Thank you to Julia and Olivia for joining me and doing this. It was so much fun. And also thank you to Mr. Canister and Dr. Gardner as well for organizing all of this. See you around. Bye.